Hi everybody, I'm Dr. Tola Porter, the Assistant Director for Learning Engagement and Technology, and we are so delighted to gather tonight for another session of this important lecture series. So this is a lecture series that brings leading voices in contemporary glass to our community, and before I get to the Palley family, just to explain that, I want to acknowledge the LOE team that makes events like this possible. Thank you, team. And also our Executive Director, Dr. Jill Dupy, who joins me in expressing our sincere gratitude to the Palley family. Lisa and Donna, hi Donna, here in the audience. And the Palley family, you probably all know this, and I know that so many of you have been to these wonderful lectures, but their extraordinary generosity brings contemporary glass artists here biannually and also connects glass artists to students. So just yesterday we had Dr. Peggy Wang's class here with the amazing engineering students who are working in material sciences, and they got to hear directly from Tom Patti, so that was fantastic. Thanks again for that, Tom. Today, Tom also spent time with Jenna Efrain, a professor of glass art, and so I love this academic connection between practicing artists who have so much knowledge and skill and learning young people who need that knowledge. Okay, with no further ado, please let me introduce Tom Patti. So we are honored to welcome Tom Patti, an exceptional artist whose visionary contributions enrich humanity and address societal challenges through innovative art and design. Recognized as a Pratt Institute icon and a recent recipient of the Corning Specialty Glass Residency, Patti's work spans an extraordinary range, from intimate glass sculptures to monumental architectural installations. And those are featured in renowned collections including the LOE, the Met Museum of Art, and the Museum of Modern Art. In the 1960s, Patti participated in the groundbreaking initiative Experiments in Art Technology, EAT, which was co-founded by none other than Robert Rauschenberg. And it fostered pioneering collaborations between artists, engineers, and industry. Since 2000, Patti has continued to expand his practice through an ongoing series titled Framing Space, a body of work that explores the history and conceptual possibilities of the picture frame as a means of investigating perception, structure, and the infinite. Through these works, Patti invites us to reconsider how boundaries shape understanding and how art can open new ways of seeing. So please join me in welcoming Tom Patti.
Well, thanks. I want to thank everyone for coming this evening. This is the third part, three-piece talk series that will be given at the university. Now, so I'll be leaving in a few days, so this is going to wind it down. I would like to recognize Myrna and Sheldon Palley, their historic collection of my work. It's beautifully presented in the museum. I hope everybody has the opportunity to see it and connect it to the talk tonight. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'd like to keep it as informal as possible. I have a lot of slides, and we're running a little late, so I'm going to try to move through as quickly as possible. Again, this is the talk is autobiographical. It's going to cover this period of work that the Palleys have collected, from their earlier one on the far left to the more recent one on the right. It have some work, how I arrived at works like this. It'll be discussed in here. As again, it's autobiographical, so it's going to cover early part of my work. Let's go way back. So Marilyn and I, my wife here, who's helped with everything, and collaborates on the work with me, and especially on the larger projects, she manages all the work and all the people involved. And at the recent Corning residency we did at the it's a science engineering their research center. It's a world-famous facility. And they brought us in to try to inspire the scientists to engage them in how artists might interpret the materials that they work with every day, that they invent, and that they're looking for applications for. And so I was thinking, you know, is what the way I grew up, if they want to know really how this all happens to us, it's about the time you spend in the sandbox. So if I was to run a research center, I'd build a huge sandbox that they could work and play in. And so this is me, probably, I don't know, a year old, and that's the backyard. I grew up in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. My parents' immigrant family. I live in the upper part of this image. And our yard backed up to the landfill. This is General Electric in the late 50s. And our property backed up to the General Electric property. And so I had access to the landfill. In those days, they didn't bury stuff. The trucks would just come in, dump it off, and I would play in it. And so I had a wonderful childhood playing with all this kind of stuff. You know, 12 o'clock, the G whistle would go on, and, you know, people would come home for lunch, then the whistle would blow again, at 5 o'clock, they'd leave the end of the day. This was the kind of community that I grew up in. By the 60s, I went to college where I met Marilyn at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. In the 60s was a revolutionary time. You know, we go from all these images. I won't go into each one because of time. You know, including the assassination of our presidents, the drug culture, plus this kind of thing. So while we're in school, this is the world that's happening around us. And so this is, I believe it's the experience that shapes your art. The experience you have in life is what you interprets the things you make. I was exposed very young, probably 8, 9 years old, and General Electric every year would have an open house, and the community would invite it. So you can imagine a young kid, and you'd see man-made lightning for the first time. GE had invented it in their high voltage facility there. And so what you see is the first high voltage piece there, man-made lightning. By the middle end of the 60s, I went back to this area because I was working on this very sort of idealistic society at the time in the 60s, and we were trying to save the planet because it was under threat. You would believe it even more than today. And so instead of going into industry, like I had studied and I had all the opportunity to, I was working on a very specialized thing in graduate school. And I wanted to continue that kind of work, and I couldn't do it in industry. They would have owned it and everything, and I was very uncompromising at the time. And I thought, well, I can do this myself. So a little farmhouse in just outside of Pittsfield. I built this little shed on the back of it with found materials, and I built a furnace in there. I put it on the front of the house so it would heat the house, right? And I built large inflatable structures, use air pressure to develop the forms. Eventually I got a patent on the material that you could build large-scale structures by using air pressure to build flat surfaces, curved surfaces, or compound surfaces, to build habitats and shelters for the world, anywhere in the world. And this was a magazine in the 60s that was published that included student work, and there's an article on the work I was doing. This material that I developed, you could inflate it. You can see on the left side it's in a box mold. I'm putting it in there, and on the right is what I'm making is it's a seat in this case, but it's basically a thin shell membrane form that can support. At the time, my girlfriend, now my wife, Marilyn. I needed there's the best looking model I could find. And, so we're on the roof of her apartment. And in that farmhouse, I would build these different scales. And in this case, I fixtured it to the floor, the ceiling, and the side. I inflated it, and the material had a resin inside. And as the membrane expanded, it rigidized the material. And as part of the idea was to build the minimum amount of material for maximum space. All right, so it was a very efficient system. And so you saw cables in that moving off the system. And here you can see them removed. You can see the one on the left where there's still elements that pull out the windows and doors into specific positions to maximize the environmental potential, the sun, the heat, whatever it was necessary to maximize the quality of the living space. And on the right is where they're removed and it's rigidized. Same time I was doing these, exploring the artistic potential of this elastic, like a rubber band, but it was maybe 30 feet in length, and it had these little suction cups. So wherever I would go, I was visiting friends, I'd do it in the house, or in this case, I was somewhere and I was in the parking lot, I saw these two cars, so I set it up, I take a photograph and then take it down. So you can see I attached them to the mirrors, the side of the car, and stuff, and so that's the terminal shape, that's the finished structure. Eventually moved from that home and that situation, and Meryl and I got married and bought a little house in what's called a hill town. It's outside of Pittsfield, very rural area. And you see Marilyn working in the garden. She's actually pregnant with our first child. So she's putting the garden in. You can see, just like when you're in Italy, looking down over the Riviera, you see the old houses where all the Italians got everything stacked behind the houses. Where when you drive by, everything looks nice, pristine, because it's all hidden in the back of everything. So I carry that tradition on. And so that's our first home together. And the pile of material in the foreground is I salvaged found materials, because my plan was to build a studio on top of the hill above the house, and that is the image on the far right, in the lower right of the studio. You can see garage doors and windows, and so that is all salvage material. It's 2 stories high, and the windows drop because I had furnaces, equipment in there, so you could lower the windows, and the heat would, the shape of the building would let the heat flow through the building. The air would come up the side of the mountain, up through the front windows, and then out the back. So my interest is in the integration of art, science, and technology. And my background and my belief that in the time we live in the 20th, 21st century, the relationship between industry, art, and science are integral to the forms and the shape we give to things. So it's unique that at the time I didn't have resources to buy materials like they have, and like you're fortunate to have in the glass shop like that they have at the university here, Jenna. And so I would salvage glass at the local glass shops. And so this I took off the roof of my car. So I would go down into Pittsfield, manage to get this on the roof, and then come home and slide it off the roof, take it up the mountain, up on top of the hill, and cut it up into small pieces of glass so that I could work on it. Don't laugh at this. This is in the archives of the Museum of Modern Art. Well, this is summer day in Savoy. It's a blizzard. A young fellow from Parsons School of Design came up and made this. This was a Super 8 film on my work. When people say, how did you get interested in glass? I have a hard time answering that. Explaining these kinds of things. That's my furnace there, so. One candle power. Just getting going here. So because of my interest in those thin shell structures for architectural application, I was using air pressure in plastic materials to develop all kinds of form technology, form systems. I built some equipment, I started to melt glass. I was interested in transparent materials. So when I was building the structures, I could see both the interior and the exterior simultaneously. So unlike most architects, you build an opaque structure, develop the form, the space, and use it as a habitat. In this case, I wanted to work with glass theoretically, to build theoretical models on how to work with architectural spaces. And so that was the initial aim of the work. In working with glass, they often had a long metal rod to go into the glass and to blow the glass, right? A blowpipe is called. But I thought that what I did was I made a glass tube and made the pipe a glass tube, and I used that as a component of the terminal shape. And so I would make these pieces and put them in the landscape and collect the atmospheric in the interior that would influence the shape of the glass or the form of the glass. So it'd be semi-opaque in this case, or translucent, and then as the day changed, it'd become transparent. So I would just put these in the snow or landscape. I was able to take glass with some of these technologies that are developed, put it together and literally program a surface. So in this case, you have two pieces of glass put together, and they're fused together in a certain way that when you put air in it, air alone determines that particular form, right? So it's programmed to make that shape. And again, this is all geared towards theoretical architectural application. I used the grid on it to be able, the lines you see in the lower right, to map the surface of it. So in the beginning, you saw a grid with the membrane systems, and that plotted locations for that membrane. In this case here, I started to attach the frame to the glass surface. The earlier works started to look like this, started to make simple forms. The opening was not necessarily at the top like you begin to see it now, but it was oriented whatever I needed it to make the form successful for me. Sometimes they were inverted. Some of these forms still exist, and they're now out in the marketplace somehow. These are small. You can see the sheets of glass. Traditional glass working, and you know, as soon as somebody goes to Italy, it's all done. They start taking hot glass and decorating it, and you can't tell quite how it all happens. One layer gets wrapped over another layer, and it becomes pretty magical. What I want to do is break that down, right? Try to find the most elemental way of working with these glass, not to hide it, but to reveal how it's made, all in the shape itself, So the form and the structure are one thing. They're architectonic shapes. So you can see actually each surface of glass is exposed as the terminal shape. By the early 70s, there was Corning Glass selects the major important glass that's been produced in the last 25 years. And so I submitted a slide to that. And I got a call that said they were interested in what I was doing and that they wanted to use my work on the cover to introduce that magazine. Well, that was great for me with Corning, but all the other artists thought they should be on the cover and made it a little difficult for a period of time. Shortly after that, I met Doug Heller in New York, a dealer of contemporary glass, and he introduced my work to the public. And this was the piece that announced the exhibition. The Metropolitan Museum of Art acquired it. And you can see by this time, working with glass now probably 8, 9 years, I began to show it, right? And I developed a pretty good vocabulary with the technology that I had developed. I could create, the forms that were of interest to me. I could create ribs, expanded volumes. I could have areas that were perpendicular to each other. I could create very crisp parallel lines and surfaces. Again, while I was working with this, it was still this sort of back and forth. There's always this overlap in the work. And so you can see it real clear when I say architectonic. It means the form and structure are one. Right. And you can see the interior bubble on the one on the right, sort of, and the sort of framework around it. Right? It's not unlike my grid with the membrane systems inside. So I'm doing the same thing, just translating it several years later with glass. But now they exist as unique objects, and they've sort of distancing themselves from my interest in the architectural application. You can see the one in the lower right where each object is revealed, is starting to become cubic on the bottom. So it's like, I'm not sure where it's going, but I just keep working on the shape. And I either discard them or find ones that I'm interested in and keep it. Once I discard, I'll photograph and just get rid of them and keep the photographs as documents of the work. So it was a sort of theoretical line of work that I was pursuing. Again, these are two works that at a fairly mature point in the development of these two distinct styles. The solar riser on the left and the banded gray with two banded stripes on the right. These are in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And they're trying to put together a complete series. The solar riser, this is in where is this? In the Washington, D.C. Yeah, in the Renwick Gallery in Washington. This is rather tall. It's one of the larger ones. It's not about the length or the size of the work to me. It's really the content of the work and whatever the scale is that it's successful at, that's what it should be. This is a small work, but I look at it very closely, and most of the photographs of my work are my own photographs. And so when you photograph your work, you make your own work, you tend to look closely at it, you examine it, whether it's intentionally or just in the pursuit of trying to deal with it, to photograph it. It brings you up close. You start looking at exterior details in a unique way. And so you can see this form, and to go in closer, my interest in the early architectural work, I could recognize that the air bubbles in this were going from a spheroid, round, to an ellipsoid, to a squarish form, all into one unique thing. And that's as air moved down through and made that shape. And I go, that's interesting. So these are the things that I might look at and develop further, or if it's so realized that I would just say this is as far as I need to take it. Eventually we moved from that little town called Savoy to another town nearby called Plainfield, where I got a bigger studio. This is the barn became my studio. The chair I had when I would do this kind of glasswork, it was a doctor's chair. I converted a doctor's chair. So I could raise the height of it, and the arms of it could go on any angle or axis. So I could just work standing up. The chair became part of the technology I was using to connect it to the work. Again, it was sort of to reveal a sort of essence in the work, to keep it as elemental as possible, and so you can see these areas. And what I began to learn is that there was a space inside the work that captured my interest. And so I began to explore the interior spaces that was created. And there was an issue between, is it a void? Is it solid? Is it space? Is that space a solid form? And so I was able to start to delineate and work on the interior. And these I call solarized surfaces. I developed these veils, these parallel veils of it. And those are actually traps of air, little tiny air bubbles that make up those surfaces. But they map the movement of the air bubble down through that form. So I could measure the depth of it by how those veils would move. So it's all sort of calculated. They become the grid from the earlier work. So I always had a way of mapping or controlling the spaces or the form with the actual materials I had at hand. The mapping of the exterior surface on very early work became mapping on the interior of forms like this. You see the edges on this. I don't know if the next slide is, but you see the highlight on this edge? So eventually, I began to understand that differently than I did at this point. And I removed it because I wanted to remove the highlight on the edge. And I wanted a window to go into the form. And, whoops, let me go back. And that highlight becomes a frame for the box. It contains it, but what I want to do is open this space, create a more infinite space. So I have sort of razor sharp edges on this. You can scrape your nail on them. And so the interior developed further, remove that edge, and so people, you look at it and say, oh, it's just a cube with glass, but there's two cubes that are this, a couple of years apart, but they're distinctly different in many ways to me. They may not be to the viewer, but to me, there's a significant difference in the two. And in that lower section is a dark area, and so I'm contrasting that with the clear area above. Because it's like the more you look, the more you'll see. And it's the deep areas that reveal themselves from looking. You just walk by it, and you look at it, you glance at it, you see little or nothing. But the more you look, the more you'll see. Then I began to realize that the light source is important. Most objects are lit arbitrarily. I talked to the kids in the science program and the engineering program about that. And so what I did was I imagined the layers is actually filtering out the light in a certain way, controlling the light as it moved through the form. And so these objects are often bottom lit only, but I conceal the light source. And so that light moves up and in a very controlled way to reveal that. You can see the shaft of light. If you look in the upper part, that dark area, that's an opaque piece of glass. So the light can come down through the center where that bubble is. There's an opening. It passes straight down through on the vertical axis through the form. The bubble here is, it's interesting. It's an opaque glass. It's used instead of transparent or translucent, so it becomes a solid volume in the form. So everything else is transparent, translucent around it, but that center core is opaque, and the bottom is opaque. So all the light is from above, and it stops at that surface above the bottom, not at the bottom, or not at the base it's on. Another series of work I did, the split risers. So sort of the wings are gone. It's that vertical form. I often take things, think of them horizontally, and then wonder what's the opposite way of looking at it. And so I would work it vertically. And so and when it goes vertical, things would change. And so this is the result of that kind of logic. You can see the side profile. You can see each layer of glass that's in it. I mean, if you turn it on its axis, they're all bilaterally symmetrical. And you can see each piece of glass that makes up that form. But from one plane, we'll say it's the front, it looks monochromatic, like one color. And then imagining that the interior glass could contain other elements, fixed elements, I started to create compositions on the interior spaces. So it's this sort of contradiction between solid and air, sort of contradicting the material it's in. It's trying to avoid being glass. Does it take you to another space to look at it and not think about the material? Think about what's being done, what I'm attempting to say with it. And I'm trying to bring my experiences from the sandbox to this. So it's these are openings that actually pass through the object. And you can see that they're not all straight on the straight axis. They're curved elements in the form. So it's a combination of these curved organic elements with the geometric forms. You can see the hard edges on that form. Some are very elemental pieces. I think it's probably the only one that is this color that I made. You can see the thin lines in it. Now it's just, and there are two. It's easy to put one in and get it straight, but putting two in, it's quite a process. It's all done hot. This went up to almost 2,000 degrees. So this was flexible. This was almost liquid at one point. These surfaces are carved by hand. Some of them, not all of them. You can see it's elevated, trying to lighten the shape, the form. So there's a space underneath it that brings that mass of color above the base. And the top is curved, so that's all ground down, sanded, by me with just a simple belt sander. It would take days, sometimes weeks, to make these forms. At a certain point, I thought of compressing them, because I was working with these thin pieces of glass, and I thought, well, what if one could be one piece of glass, or appear to be one piece of glass? So I started to compress the shape, collapse it. And this is series. I would often look at things in series, looking for sort of a comparative analysis of them. And so this is the same glass. It's one glass that I affected to form the shape over that period. So for me, they function individually, but at the same time, I see it as one piece. because it's the same thought process conceptually. Again, the idea that the solid mass could be sort of captured space, and that space can take within space. You can change the forms within the space, and so these surfaces show an activity to make the space solid, to give it mass, and to bring it to some form of energy. So I did several of these. I call them particles, like they're gathering as they move through space. They gather, they finalize their form and their shape. I've done several large projects. This is one in the 80s that did a General Electric, and I worked with some of the young people there, and this is in the deconstruction of one of the elements that I'm going to form, the one on the bottom, and removing that element on the top. This is the final piece. On the right is the entrance of the General Electric World Plastics headquarters in Pittsfield, Mass. This is all made out of polycarbonate plastic. So what they were interested in, and what I was interested in, was that I would take advantage of all the history of General Electric plastics, what they had created and what the new ones that were in development. And so the sculpture on the left is the final form that I did, and it was positioned in the center of the entrance of their headquarters. After I finished that project, I was interested in going into large-scale architectural scale, something larger than human size. So I leased the building. Eventually, we bought it on the right, and the entrance on the left. And I got rid of my glass top, sold everything but our house, and bought this. It's called an autoclave. It's a high-pressure and temperature vessel. This particular vessel prototyped the stealth fighter bomber, the plane that you saw go over to Iraq a couple of months ago, take out the nuclear sites. Was that fuselage for those planes was prototyped, developed by that particular machine. So I bought that from industry several years ago, and I had to get a special crane to bring it into the building. The door weighs 5 tons. The bulkhead of that weighs 5 tons. And on the right, you can see I work large scale. I have another machine. I still do most of the work myself. So I bought some glass handling equipment that I can move around and pick up glass. So on the right, you see me setting a piece of glass into a metal frame that I had just welded up. Another large project at Owens Corning in Toledo, Ohio. This is the world headquarters. I was fortunate in most of these cases on large projects to work with very well-known, respected architects. In this case, it was Cesar Palley, Pritzker Prize winner, who not too long ago unfortunately passed away. And this is the interior, and this was like a 2-year project we worked on. And so once he saw the potential with my work, he came up with a lot of ideas or areas that he said I could explore. He didn't tell me what to make, but he said, maybe you would think of do something down the hallway or in the hallway. So it was left up to me. So I developed the entrance, around the entrance where that figure is standing, some cast pieces there, and then entrance to a corridor. Here, with these cast pieces, I developed interesting ways to cast glass and able to apply them to this application. Another large project in New York for the Metropolitan Transit Authority. This is in Queens, 64th Street station in Queens. So that blue reflective area is the work. But I went around the area and took photographs of what it would look like from different sight lines. And this is it from the interior. So as people move through, you can see the color projected on the floor and on the surfaces on the interior. Another project, these are doors at the MFA in Boston. So originally, my work would go in as a pedestal, an object and thing, and it's interesting that then it became part of the buildings themselves. Interesting transformation. Because it's it was the concept, still that architectural interest that I kept pursuing. Often people would see that embodied in the work. This is a home for an architect. This is Graham Gunn's home. And you can see the entrance on the left. And I developed this material that it was sightline specific. So as you moved around the entrance or approached it or crossed the entrance, it would open and close in a grid system to transparent or translucent visibility. A lot of the glass I make, is not appropriate for certain things, but it's really interesting to me, and so I thought the best application was not vertically, but horizontally. So I made a series of tables, and so you see Meryl and I sitting on the tables there. But up above on the right, see that image, that red and blue figure? Well, there's another window beyond that. So the image on the left is that projected image of light from the sun coming through the outside window, through the interior colored window, onto the wall opposite my tables in the room. And so once I recognized I could take the light from outdoors, bring it in, manipulate it, I changed the angle of that colored piece in there so I can specifically register it at certain times of the year, specific spot on the wall in that room. And so, you recognize the possibility with without light you have no form. And so you can then start to work with light. And so I developed this canopy, for a marquee for, what's this? This is Morton Square on the off the West Side Highway in Lower Manhattan. And so light comes from the ground up, the walkway, and it reflects off the bottom, comes back down, and illuminates the entry. You can see I also did the doors, and so this is the developer. He said, "Tom, do whatever you think you want to do." He opened the budget and everything. I said, "Okay, let's start from the outside and work our way in." And then we get in the lobby. So I wouldn't call it a chandelier, but I did this large suspended light fixture at one end. So it captures the light coming from the west side, evening light. And I knew it would cast it in the entrance area. And so the interesting thing with this is it appears suspended in air because it's got cables that are 5/1000 of an inch in diameter that I laminated inside the glass. And those are what are attached to the upper part of the ceiling where the light fixtures are. So the glass elements contain the structural elements that support it. And you can see the wall behind the desk. And then if you walk further down to the elevators, there's a clear story there. So I took that light and I developed these panels and suspended them in front of the light. Cables come down, hold them under tension, and they actually tension and compression, and the fixtures are mounted in the wall surface. And it changes color, different kinds of things happen as you move. They're, again, sightline specific. And many people here may be familiar, but I'm the guy who did that on the wall, if you didn't see the name underneath it. And it's not unlike today when it rained. I was in Miami visiting some friends and it started raining. Well, I thought it was just, rain was just going to stop. it kept raining, and all of a sudden the road's 3 inches of rain, and the rain is it's coming on a diagonal, and I was so impressed. I said, boy, you're going to do something, the rain's the inspiration for this. So I did this thing I called Miami Rain. And before it was, in the process of developing it, I mocked it up on storage containers in the building next door. And so that's at my studio on the right where Marilyn has her hands on it. Originally, it was composed of these louvers because it had to be ventilated because of it's used as for penthouses. You can see on the left up above, but it's also the garage for it. And the original concept, it was for 3 sides of the building, which was what I always wanted to do, was to make the structure of the entire building a work of art, right? My piece. So the cube now is, 17, 18 stories high in that. But this is 2008, and if anybody was around then, it was a financial crisis. So there was a lot of pressure. Yeah, it was sort of uncompromising. It was a little difficult battle, but I made several variations. They said, well, just make it smaller. And then you just don't make it smaller, It's like you have to rethink the whole process, and so I began to rethink it. And so there are individual blades that are staggered along one area of it. And it wraps one corner. Another project, and I hope there's some kids from the engineering class I spoke to the other day where I was talking to that I love a problem, I go crazy starting to seek a solution to it. So this is the airport in California, in Oakland, at the Oakland airport. And I wanted to use a reflective glass. This is a gold glass, reflective surface. And of course, where's the last place you'd want to use a highly reflective surface would be an airport, right? Where the planes coming in and they get blinded so that. So I did a lot of studies of this particular, this is where the BART trains let the passengers off to enter the airport. So I did a light study of the sun going over it. To spend a lot of time and resources to figure out how to control the reflective surface on the building. And so, I had to prove that I had to sell it, I had to prove that it could be done. And so, these are the kinds of things that we did. And so this is the finished thing. So now we're both outside the work of art, but we're also inside the work of art. And so you can see the gold on the surface, and it wrapped the entire building. You can see it from the interior. So you have access to the interior looking at it, but it also allows you visibility to the exterior. There's a museum, this is the Berkshire Museum, what I did. Kept these low to the floor for children. You go there and watch the kids go there. And so everything's so often so high in museums. But look at the kids, this is, bring it down to their world. And the stuff I did, allowed them to see into the work. Then another large project in Europe. I have a dealer in France. We've got a project in Cannes. And this is I'm studying both the coastline of France and the constellations. So, Bastille days, 17, I can't remember exactly what it was. That day, the star constellation was that pattern there, and I superimposed that over the coastline of France, and so that became. And this is me working on it in the studio. This is my son-in-law, Alex. And so these are details of it, and this is the final installation in the home, in the residence. This is another work. This is that gold glass. And I call this earth sky, and it draws a relationship. We talked about with the light coming through the building, but also the sun, how the sun moves directly in and over the work. And so here looking at how the observer sees the work, both on the landscape and how it's how you see the reflection and the transparency. So you see the glass and you see through the glass of the tree beyond. So it has all those qualities. I don't do a lot of drawings preparatory, but when I'm doing something like that, it's less empathic, it's not spontaneous. Everything else sort of intuitive. I make it, I assemble it. I don't know what it's going to look like at the end, and that's important in everything you've been looking at. I don't necessarily predict what it's going to look like. You know, I work on it and let it find itself. In this case here, once I know what I want to make, I make several models, and then I'll do a drawing of it. And then construct it, weld it in my shop, and then hopefully find some friends and install it. So I wanted to be prominent on the sky, so I raised it. I raised the landscape a little. This is the summer home of Daniel Chester French, one of the three most important sculptors at the turn of the century. And he made his home in Glendale, Mass, near Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And every year they have an annual sculpture exhibition. And I was the youngest one in there when I was 20 years old, 18, 19, 20 years old. Then when I did this piece, I looked around and met a lot of the people. I was the oldest one there. It's interesting. I'm not complaining. And so this, you know, gives me an opportunity that I know these things happen, but I don't know quite how it's going to look. And so I make it, install it, and then I sit back like it's not even my work, and amaze it what the materials we can develop at the time we live in, and how they can interact with the space they're in, and how you look at them, what you see, and what you can imagine. You know, the earlier one's like a portal, and this glass in this condition, it appears like you could walk right into it. You know, it's unearthly. Meryl and I were fortunate to be selected for a residency at the Corning Research Center. They wanted me to work in the hot glass thing initially, and I said, you know, it's not my interest any longer. But I would like to work with the 1,500 scientists and engineers that you have here and see what we can do. So I found, so I spent 3 days walking around talking to people. They took me everywhere. I found a unique glass, and I found this machine that they had developed but never used. And it's centrifugally cast glass. I said, let's try that. You know, they said, great, we don't know what we can do with it. So this particular scientist developed this glass. It's called metameric glass. And so that's what he kept coming up with all kinds of colors and formulations of it. And so we started casting it. It took quite a while, but eventually we were able to develop this torch system, keeping the top cold to work. And so I made these the last couple of days I was there. For 6 months, I just experimented with stuff. I discarded everything. Did not make it to save it, just made it to study it. Or maybe this day, or maybe this day didn't even want to come. But this is it. So, see, I knew from working with hot glass that the core of this would be hot glass. That when it touched the mold, it would cool. But the center of it, that I could drop all that crushed glass in there and it would stick to the interior surface. So it comes from past experience, you know, coming forward to generate this shape. It's super hot. That's a graphite mold, and you can see it glowing on the side. And there's like a half a dozen people to make this one thing. This is one of the earlier forms that came out of that. And you can see it all fractured because the intent wasn't to save it. It was just to explore the possibilities working this way. And so this is the scientist, and it responds to different light waves, incandescent, fluorescent, ultraviolet, and daylight. And each one of those wavelengths of light changes the color of the glass. And so you can see it's pinkish in one light and sort of yellow-ish. Those are all cracks in the glass. I thought it was really beautiful how the light was refracting within that cylinder. So for me, it didn't have to be a solid, continuous surface. The cracks were not an issue in trying to find the essence of what I could do with this technology. This is the final form. This is actually the one that was being made in that image. So on the left is what it looks like in daylight, and on the right is what it looks like in UV light. So that UV light is it's measured in certain nanometers in a wavelength scale. And so as you move up and down the scale and use different fluorescent wavelengths, you can, each of those colors, the green, the yellow, and all these, they'll respond to specific wavelengths of ultraviolet light. So I built this gizmo that rotates this, and I have these different lights in here, and this thing turns, and it's quite a setup. And they're hollow. Instead of it being what most glass makers would think of from the work they do, they need a bottom on it often to handle it and move it around. Or the shape of blowing something, you have a continuous surface most often. They can make cylinders with this. I can also make a flat bottom, but the simple process with this machine generated a tube. And so I made a tube, and you can see in here the fractured pieces of glass. This is another recent project. This is Madison House on Madison Avenue and 31st Street in Manhattan. This is a column in the center of the lobby. This piece of glass is more than 12 feet in length, a couple of feet in width. There's a detail on the right. I also did a piece for the entrance. And as people move through the door or affect the door, it rotates. You can see on the right-hand side, and moving. And they're actuated by the door, because they're on the interior of that space. So this can be viewed from the exterior or the interior of the building. And it's galvanized, simple galvanized steel and brass. Since 2020, I've been exploring the frame, the picture frame specifically. And so this is what I'm involved in now. People ask, what are you doing? I said, well, at the end of we're nearing the end of it now, and most of it's in chronological order. So this is the frame. Both the frame, the interior of this frame and the frame itself are the content of the frame. There's no separation. I don't distinguish frame in the space. I think of them as one. Right? So frame and space is the content of this work. And I make a reference to the frame more clear instead of rosettes in the corners, I made these 3 little glass beads that are fused to it. And as I researched the frames, I became interested in perspective. These were flat, and I'm thinking, well, how can I, and I'm interested in the space, and I began to think, well, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. So I said, I work with perspective, and I was pretty good in art school. They would have me go up on the wall and draw something 3-dimensionally. But I went back and figured out what was the origin of it. And I went back to the Renaissance, southern Italy, the 13th, 14th, 15th century. And this is the work. This is a tabernacle by Bertolo Rossellino around 1440. And you can see the columns on the right. I won't get into all the details. But the interesting thing here, these are lines of perspective, but they don't stop on the surface of it. Because it's a tabernacle, and it's for worship, it is either a relic behind it, that it would create this feeling to the viewer that it was unearthly, that it was something to aspire to, that it was unattainable. And so it was, I thought, God, these brilliant people at that time, you know, it brought the viewer with these axis lines of this very shallow. This is only an inch or so deep, but the way it's designed, it has this great sense of depth, and the same application to all the churches and cathedrals. And so I began this thing I call the Tabernacle series. So instead of a bronze door being in the lower part and that, in the stairs and that, I took elements of it and rethought them, reimagined them this way. And this is glass. And there are frames that they used to transport. In the 14th century, nobility would take their artwork or their religious works and take them from their residence in Venice to their villa outside of Venice, and so they would have these doors on them. So I began to, with the galvanized metal from the other project, I began to make the Tabernacle series this way. So this was the first one. It's a little further along now. This is my last slide, and I'm with a scientist at Corning, you know, and he was working with fiber optics, and he and I were playing with it. And this slide is meant for any kids here, anybody. You know, if you don't have a sandbox, you know, to play in, you know, find somebody, someplace, something that you can enjoy just as much. And that's how I try to, you know, Marilyn and I and the kids try to live our lives, and I hope you all have an opportunity to experience similar things. Yeah.